presentation is about veterans in San Diego. Yes. The reason why I wanted to look at this issue is because about 17 years ago I left the military and experienced a lot of the challenges of transitioning from the military to civilian life. And in the next few months, my sister is retiring after 20 years in the Navy. She's been sharing with me some of the experiences she's having as she's trying to look forward. I must assume that many of you have family or friends who are veterans or are active duty military. So I don't want to offend anyone by assuming that you don't know what I'm going to talk about today. This is about simply raising awareness of veterans as a diversity group among your library staff. Those people who might not know as much as you do. It's a big topic. There we go. The reason why I think of veterans as a diversity issue is because they are a unique group with unique cultural experiences. Even the way that a person would communicate in the military is completely different than the way we communicate in civilian life. As you leave the military, it's very difficult for many people to learn to communicate differently. But of course, that's not the case with everyone, and I don't want to overgeneralize. A really important thing to think about when you're thinking about veterans and diversity is that when veterans leave the military, they are experiencing a highly unusual form of isolation. When you're in the military, everyone you work with is a member of your family, and you're willing to put your life on the line for those people that you work with. When you leave the military, that's not the case, and all of those people who were in your family are either still in the military or they left the military and moved to their hometown. They've got different goals now. People move on, and that big change in your social group has an effect on veterans, especially today. Another thing to think about is that veterans are experiencing isolation just because of that change of routine. The military life is highly structured, and it's very difficult for veterans to adjust to the lack of structure in civilian life. So those are some of the things you can think about when someone walks in the door and you think that they might be a veteran. Another thing to think about is we tend to think that veterans have a lot of resources. They've got the VA, they've got pension, they've got all these great benefits. But the fact is, there is so much information, and it's not really organized. It's very overwhelming, especially if you have a family and you're moving to a new town. And if you're coping with something like PTSD. So I think thinking about veterans as a diversity group and how to provide some information and resources for veterans is something that we should be doing in every public library. Of course, many public libraries in San Diego are already doing some things. Some statistics, according to the website of the VA, presently about 600,000 veterans are seeking services in San Diego, benefits, health benefits, or financial benefits, or mental health. New battlefield medicine yields more survivors of trauma, so we're dealing with a lot more cases of veterans coping with mental health issues than we ever have before. And because of those recurring tours of duty that active duty military experience when they're in the military, we're seeing a lot more cases of post-traumatic stress syndrome. And then, of course, in San Diego, we have a lot of veterans from previous wars who are living longer, healthier lives, which means we're not just dealing with the influx of new veterans, but we're also dealing with veterans who have been out of the military for a long time. But they still might have some of those characteristics that you might want to look at when looking at your services. I put this box in here. I don't want it to be misleading. You might think the veterans can just go to any active duty military installation to connect with other veterans, but that's not the case. When you're out, you're out. You don't have a military ID unless you qualify for certain pension benefits or other things. So when you're out of the military, you can't go back to all of these military installations that we see. And information about where you can go as a veteran to connect with other veterans, that information is very hard to find sometimes. So providing veterans with information about where to connect with other veterans is something to think about when you have a website devoted to veterans or a web page. More statistics, almost 2 million veterans are in the state of California. It's the highest in the country. 25% of California's veterans are disabled. And when veterans are coping with a disability, they need resources on how to cope with disabilities, and family and friends of veterans are also looking for those resources. So there's a significant need that we want to address in public libraries. Because of that isolation, veterans will feel, no, I can't say that it's always, but in many cases, a veteran may feel like a minority when entering the library. He or she might feel shy or reluctant to talk. That's something to think about. And also think about how your staff, they may not be as knowledgeable as you are about how to communicate with a veteran. And this is just a side note. More than $6 billion are invested in San Diego by the Department of Defense. That is an outstanding source of funding that public libraries can tap into in building programs and information resources for veterans. I mentioned it before, when you leave the military, you're experiencing a lot of isolation. I think that's one of the highest, well, one of the most important needs that veterans will have. They want space to meet with other veterans and share their stories. It's a great way to cope with the separation from the military. Again, information, you're going to see a lot of websites out there, but what veterans really need is one page with just 5 places to go. What librarians need, a reference library in particular, is maybe to have a binder at the front desk with a hotline, a suicide hotline, another phone number where veterans can go just to get started or restart with the VA, and then a website where they can look at places to meet with other veterans. And another side note, many of the veterans that I've met with are not able to access medical care because they can't get to the La Jolla facility. They don't know that there are free shuttles. There are transportation services available to them. So when you're thinking about building a Pathfinder or a web page for veterans, that's something that you might want to think about. Okay. These are the low-cost possibilities, things that you can do immediately to provide information for your veterans. Of course, some of you already have some great Pathfinders out there, and we do have libraries that have already collaborated with the VA to provide facilities for veterans. The least expensive thing to do is just to have a web page. It's easy to find. Don't call it government resources. Call it veteran resources. A veteran's not going to look for the word government. A Pathfinder Live Guide is inexpensive, and there are some samples in this presentation, and most of you have a CD in your folder with a copy of this presentation. There's a bibliography at the end where you can look at some of those sample live guides and websites where you can go for more information. Another low-cost solution is just to have a binder or one page in a binder of frequently used information. One page with the most important phone numbers and contact information for veterans. Surprisingly, the people that I've interviewed so far, most of them don't have this at their reference desk, and they do have some difficulty answering questions that veterans ask. And of course, as Alan was talking about, there are advocacy organizations out there everywhere. I didn't want to list them on this website because there's so many, but there are some in my bibliography. The top 3 that I would suggest are Veteran Museum in Balboa Park. It's a great place to send someone who's a little bit lost and just wants to go somewhere to talk to someone else. The Veteran Museum at Balboa Park is always open, and the docents there are veterans themselves, and they come from all different backgrounds. It's a wonderful place to reconnect with other veterans. The U.S. Army Wounded Warrior Program is one example where there's a lot of funding for disabled veterans and mental health resources. And then, of course, there is the VA and grants through the VA. I'm not going to go through this. This is going to be on the CD that you have in your packet. If you don't have a CD in your packet, I will be emailing you a link to this presentation online. These are more thought-out ideas of how to organize information and the kind of information needs that a veteran might have. And then here's some examples of some really good pathfinders. This one, for example, they're providing electronic and audiobook resources for veterans who may not easily be able to read using glasses. In addition to journals and magazines that a veteran would help a veteran feel connected with the veteran community. And then they have websites where a veteran can go for resources. There are a lot of books out there. In fact, bibliotherapy is an exciting area where you might look into in building a Pathfinder. So I have recommended works at the end of this presentation: nonfiction, fiction. Most recently, the Library Journal published an article on Wounded Warrior with some collection development recommendations. I would suggest that, at the very least, you read that article. It's really good at profiling veterans. I also have a list here of websites where you can go. And that's about it. I'll email you a link to my presentation online. For those of you who haven't used it, slideshare.com is a website where you can upload your PowerPoint presentations. It's YouTube for PowerPoint. And it's actually a good resource for researching issues, too. There's a lot of librarians post their things up there. I learned a lot about IT on slideshare.com. Okay, so I'm done.